Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into forgiveness and resentment in relationships.
Oh, tricky stuff.
Yeah, we're looking at this Liam Naden video, How to Get Your Spouse to Forgive You and Heal the Resentment.
Right.
It's kind of aimed at married couples, but, a lot of what he talks about.
Applies to any close relationship.
Totally. Applies to any close relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not just like surface level advice. I mean, he digs into some real
Oh, yeah.
psychology stuff too.
Yeah, he brings in some good psychological concepts that I think are going to help us have a really insightful look at this whole thing about how resentment just kind of festers and what actually helps or hinders forgiveness.
So one thing that jumped out at me right away, he talks about these specific behaviors that can really lead to resentment, like big time. He mentioned things like public humiliation.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. Or belittling your partner, or just constantly neglecting their needs. And something I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah.
Sometimes the person who's been hurt will actually try to hurt you back.
It's almost instinctive, isn't it? Like when we feel pain, especially emotional pain, there's this urge to either withdraw or lash out, right? Think about it from like an attachment theory perspective. If someone's had their attachment needs unmet over and over again, they might develop these kind of anxious or avoidant tendencies, and that's going to come out in how they handle conflict.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So how does this tie into resentment?
Well, think of it this way. Those old wounds, those unmet needs, they become like the perfect breeding ground for resentment. It's like this low-grade fever in the relationship, Always simmering beneath the surface, ready to erupt
Oh, I like that.
at any given moment.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big blow-ups either, right?
Yeah.
He makes this point that even seemingly small things, if they happen over and over again, can chip away at the foundation.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. And this is where things get interesting. He talks about two types of resentment, which I think is key to understanding how to move forward. First, what you might call genuine resentment, where the person wants to forgive but just doesn't know how.
Right, they're stuck. They know they should forgive, but the feelings are too intense.
They just can't get there.
They can't get there.
And then there's what he calls strategic resentment. This is where it's almost like the hurt person's using their pain to punish the other person.
It's about power and control in the relationship.
It's less about genuine forgiveness and more about,
Control.
control.
Yeah.
So in that case, forgiveness might be more about them letting go of that need for control rather than you doing something to earn it,
Yeah.
which is a tough pill to swallow.
It is, and that's why this whole idea of understanding the psychological dynamics is so important. Imagine, for example, someone with, say, a narcissistic personality. That need for control might be so ingrained that genuine forgiveness feels threatening to their sense of self.
That's deep, man.
Deep stuff.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. And, I'll be honest. When I first heard him talking about how forgiveness can happen instantly, I was a little skeptical because we're so used to this idea of time heals all wounds.
Yeah, and it's important to acknowledge that not all wounds heal quickly, especially if we're talking about trauma. But what I think he's getting at is that true forgiveness is, at its core, a decision.
Okay.
Choice to release those negative emotions.
Even if the hurt's still there.
Yeah, it's not about denying the pain or pretending it didn't happen, but saying, okay, I'm not going to let this define me anymore. It's not going to control my present or my future.
So it's more about shifting your focus. Instead of being a victim of what happened, you're choosing to heal.
You're becoming an agent of your own healing. You're taking the reins.
Okay, I like that. So let's dive into those 5 steps for forgiveness. I'll be honest, some of these were real eye-openers for me. That first step, taking responsibility, or rather, not taking responsibility for your partner's feelings, that one kind of threw me for a loop.
I think it's easy to fall into that trap, though, isn't it? Like, we want to fix things, make our loved ones feel better.
Oh, totally.
But in the end,
It's their process.
each person needs to own their own emotional process, right?
So it's more about offering support, creating that safe space for them to work through those feelings rather than trying to fix them or talk them out of it.
Exactly. And this is where that concept of emotional regulation comes in. We can't control someone else's emotions, but we can model healthy ways of processing our own. If you think about it, if you react to their anger with anger, you're just escalating the situation.
It just keeps going back and forth.
Yeah, vicious cycle. Instead, you take a step back, regulate your own emotions, and then respond from a place of, okay, calm and understanding.
So step 1 is about boundaries, emotional responsibility. What about step 2?
Step 2 is forgiving yourself. This is often the hardest part, wouldn't you say? I mean, we are so much harder on ourselves.
Oh, 100%. We hold on to that guilt and shame, just replaying the mistakes in our minds.
And that guilt, that shame, might feel like a form of self-punishment, but it doesn't actually serve anyone. It just keeps you stuck in the past, prevents you from moving forward, and really erodes your sense of self-worth.
So how do you actually start forgiving yourself? It's such a, I don't know, an abstract concept sometimes.
Naden suggests starting with self-compassion. Think about it. How would you talk to a friend who made a similar mistake? Would you beat them up about it?
Probably not.
Or would you offer kindness and understanding?
I'd be way more compassionate with a friend, for sure.
Exactly. So why not extend that same compassion to yourself? Acknowledge that you're human, you made a mistake, but you're doing the best you can.
It's like giving yourself permission to not be perfect, to learn from your mistakes.
Right, which is a crucial foundation for not only forgiving yourself, but also rebuilding trust in the relationship.
Okay, so we've got taking responsibility for our own emotions, forgiving ourselves. What's next?
Step 3 is all about acknowledgement and resolution. This is where you explicitly state that you feel remorse and that you desire to heal the relationship.
It's deeper than just saying, I'm sorry, right? You're acknowledging the impact your actions had on the other person.
Right, it's like saying, I understand I hurt you, I see the pain I caused, and I'm truly sorry.
And it's not about groveling or endless apologies. It's more about taking ownership.
Yeah, owning your actions, communicating that commitment to make things right.
And he's saying you need to do this in a way that's powerful and decisive,
Show your partner you're serious about change.
so they know you mean it.
Actions need to align with those words. If you apologize for neglecting your partner's needs, but then keep prioritizing work over their well-being, those words will ring hollow.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words, right?
Okay.
Okay, so we've got responsibility, self-forgiveness, and acknowledgement. What's step 4 about?
Step 4 is interesting. It's about encouraging your partner to acknowledge this universal truth that we all make mistakes.
So it's not about minimizing their pain, but about fostering this sense of, like, shared accountability.
Exactly. It's about gently guiding them to acknowledge that, hey, they might have also made mistakes in the past.
To even the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, which can really diffuse some of that resentment and create space for a more balanced perspective.
Okay, so the first 4 steps have focused on owning your actions, encouraging your partner to take responsibility for their feelings, and creating a shared understanding of the situation. Now, what about step 5? Give it to me.
All right. Step 5 is where the rubber really meets the road. It's about creating a positive healing environment.
Okay.
This step shifts the focus away from dwelling on the negativity of the past and towards actively building a more positive future together.
I like that. So how do we do that?
Well, he gets really specific about actionable strategies.
Right.
One thing he advises against, which I found interesting, is constantly apologizing, especially if your partner's already upset.
That seems counterintuitive. If someone's upset, you apologize.
It seems that way, but think about it. If you keep apologizing, you're kind of reinforcing the idea that you're the one at fault and they're the victim.
So it keeps them in that victim role.
Exactly. It's not about ignoring their feelings, but encouraging them to process them in a healthy way, not just expecting you to soothe them all the time.
Okay, so it's about shifting from that dynamic of constant reassurance to one that's more about mutual empowerment.
Exactly. It's about both of you growing.
So that's all part of creating that positive healing environment. What else does he suggest?
He emphasizes the importance of being attractive and showcasing your mental strength.
Okay, wait, hold on. Now, I know what you're thinking.
I'm sure.
He's not talking about superficial attractiveness here. It's more about, exuding confidence, a positive outlook, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about demonstrating that you're not stuck in negativity. You're actively choosing to focus on the good, on building a brighter future.
So it's more about being a source of strength and stability for your partner, inspiring them to do the same.
Right. He also talks about not reacting to negativity, not engaging in arguments or blame games, but instead shifting the conversation to more positive topics.
Changing the dynamic.
Yeah, it's like saying, look, I'm not playing that game anymore. I'm investing my energy in something positive. It takes a lot of strength and self-control, but it sends a clear message about your commitment to change.
Okay, step 5 is packed with great advice. So after all of that, what would you say is the most crucial takeaway for our listeners?
For me, it's about personal responsibility and the power of choosing your focus. We can't force someone to forgive us, but we can create an environment that's conducive to healing and growth by modeling that responsibility ourselves.
That's a great point. True forgiveness is an inside job. It's about releasing the negativity and choosing to move forward with strength and clarity.
It's not about forgetting or saying what happened was okay. It's about transforming that pain into a catalyst for positive change.
So it's like alchemy taking that hurt, that resentment, and using it to create something better.
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into his next point. He talks about how resentment can be a sign of unmet needs.
Okay.
He suggests that instead of getting hung up on the anger, we dig a little deeper. Ask ourselves, what need of mine wasn't being met in that situation?
So it's not just the emotion itself, it's the root cause.
Right. So let's say someone's feeling constantly belittled by their partner. It might be because their need for respect and validation isn't being met.
Okay, that makes sense.
And by identifying that need, you can address it directly, right? Instead of getting caught up in the blame game, you shift the conversation. You're saying, okay, this is what I need. How can we make sure this need gets met going forward?
That changes everything. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about finding solutions.
It's about collaboration.
Yeah, teamwork.
Right.
He actually shares this really impactful story about a couple he worked with where the husband had been deeply hurt by something his wife did. For years, he held on to that pain, and it was just poisoning their relationship.
It happens. It's so easy to get caught up in that hurt and resentment, especially when the wound runs deep.
So what happened with them?
Well, the husband was so focused on his pain that he couldn't even see the efforts his wife was making to repair things.
It's like he was blinded by his own hurt.
It really is. And Nathan helped him see that forgiveness wasn't about condoning her actions, but about freeing himself from the prison of his own resentment.
So it was about him taking back his power, choosing to move forward, not staying stuck in the past.
And you know what's amazing? Once he made that shift, their relationship blossomed. He was finally able to see his wife's efforts, appreciate her genuine remorse.
It's like the transformative power of forgiveness. It unlocks the door to healing and lets love flow again.
It reminds us that we can't control someone else's actions or feelings, but we can choose how we respond to those actions and how we manage our own emotions.
It's about taking ownership of our healing journey, recognizing that we have that power to choose forgiveness, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And that leads us to his next point, which is about understanding those specific behaviors that trigger those deep feelings of resentment.
Okay, let's get into those. He calls them resentment breeders. Things like public humiliation, which can be so damaging.
Especially to a person's sense of self-esteem and security in the relationship.
Imagine being belittled in front of friends or family.
It's like a public betrayal. It leaves these deep wounds.
It's a recipe for resentment, and it destroys trust.
It makes you feel unsafe, disrespected.
And he doesn't just talk about those big, dramatic moments. He also emphasizes neglecting your partner's needs.
Emotional, physical, intellectual, all of it. It's about feeling unseen, unheard, unvalued.
And this can show up in so many ways. Prioritizing work over your partner's needs. Not showing affection, just not being present.
That gradual erosion of connection and intimacy can really make someone feel isolated and resentful.
He also mentions something called intentional hurt, where the hurt partner actually lashes out to inflict pain on the other person.
Yeah, it's reactive, driven by a need to make the other person feel the same pain they're feeling.
It's like this misguided attempt to even the score, but it just perpetuates that cycle of hurt and resentment.
It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Makes it worse.
It just makes things so much worse.
And this can take so many forms, from verbal attacks to emotional manipulation, even physical aggression.
It's dangerous. It can lead to further damage and ultimately destroy the relationship.
He gives this really vivid example. He talks about a couple where the wife had an emotional affair, the husband found out and was devastated.
Infidelity, whether physical or emotional, can be incredibly painful. It really shatters that foundation of trust.
Absolutely. And in this case, the husband, he was so consumed by his pain that he started withdrawing from his wife, neglecting her needs, making these cutting remarks.
It's a classic case of intentional hurt, trying to make her feel his pain.
He was so focused on punishing her that he couldn't see how his actions were pushing her further away, making it impossible for them to reconcile.
It's that tragic cycle that unfolds when couples don't communicate effectively, don't address those root causes of the resentment.
So it's about breaking the cycle, focusing on understanding, empathy, taking responsibility for your actions.
Shifting that focus from blame and punishment to healing and growth.
And he emphasizes seeking professional help when needed. Sometimes the wounds are too deep to navigate those challenges alone.
Absolutely. Therapy can be a safe space to explore those feelings, learn to communicate, and develop healthy ways of coping.
So we've talked about the importance of forgiveness, the 5 steps, those behaviors that lead to resentment. Now let's dive into this blame game and why it's so destructive.
The blame game is a classic trap, especially when couples are struggling with hurt and resentment. It's that endless cycle of pointing fingers, trying to prove who's right and who's wrong.
Oh, it's exhausting, like a tennis match with no winner.
Exactly. The problem is it prevents you from focusing on what really matters, like understanding each other's perspectives, taking responsibility, finding solutions,
You're so stuck in the negativity, you lose sight of the bigger picture,
the health of the relationship.
and it breeds defensiveness and resentment.
It's like building walls instead of bridges.
Exactly. And those walls get higher with every accusation, making it harder and harder to reconnect.
He makes a really interesting comparison in his video. He compares it to a courtroom where each person is both the prosecutor and the defendant, determined to win at all costs.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, powerful image, right.
Yeah.
But that adversarial approach, it's the opposite of what a healthy relationship needs.
Instead of working as a team,
Right.
you're at war.
You become enemies, fighting for your own righteousness.
And in any war, there are casualties.
Trust, intimacy, and ultimately that love that brought you together in the first place.
So how do we break free from this blame game?
One thing he suggests is shifting the focus. Instead of who's to blame, it becomes what happened. So you move away from assigning fault and focus on understanding the sequence of events, like your detectives, piecing together the story without jumping to conclusions.
So it's about being curious, collaborating, not accusing.
Exactly. And it involves practicing active listening, truly hearing and understanding your partner's perspective without interrupting or getting defensive.
That's harder than it sounds, right?
Mhm.
Especially when you feel like you're being attacked.
It is, but it's so powerful for building empathy and understanding
You're putting yourself in their shoes, seeing the situation through their eyes.
and acknowledging their feelings, even if you don't agree with their interpretation.
He makes a good point there. Validation doesn't mean agreement. You can validate their feelings without condoning their actions.
Right. It's about saying, look, I hear you, I understand how you feel, and those feelings are valid. Just that simple act can diffuse tension and create space for a more productive conversation.
Okay, so we're understanding their perspective. Then what?
Well, he also talks about taking responsibility for your own actions, not trying to justify or excuse them,
So acknowledging your role, even if you don't think you're entirely to blame.
and expressing genuine remorse for any hurt you might have caused, regardless of your intentions.
You're showing accountability and a willingness to learn.
He also suggests using I statements instead of you statements. Like, instead of saying, you always make me feel, you could say, I feel when.
It's a subtle shift, but it takes the focus off blame and puts it on your own experience.
Exactly. It invites the other person in without making them defensive.
So less attacking, more inviting.
Right. Another crucial tip he offers is to focus on solutions.
Not dwelling on the past.
Exactly.
Ah.
Shift the conversation from what went wrong to how do we fix it.
Okay.
It's about moving forward together.
Proactive, collaborative.
And this could mean brainstorming solutions together, seeking help, or just making a commitment to changing your behavior.
It's about taking those concrete steps to repair the damage and rebuild that trust.
Absolutely.
So breaking free from the blame game is really crucial for creating that healthy and fulfilling relationship. It's a shift from being adversaries to collaborators, focusing on solutions instead of fault, and building that future together.
It's choosing love over blame, understanding over judgment, forgiveness over resentment.
Beautifully put. But stepping out of that blame game, it can be hard, especially if it's become a pattern in the relationship.
You're right. It takes conscious effort, self-awareness, a willingness to challenge those old habits.
But the rewards are huge. When you break free, you make space for empathy, understanding, genuine connection.
That's what we're all searching for, isn't it? To feel seen, heard, and loved,
Yeah.
even in those imperfect moments.
Absolutely. And speaking of those deeper needs and dynamics, he also talks about this idea of control and how it plays into resentment and forgiveness.
Right. He's observed that often the hurt partner might cling to their resentment as a way of maintaining some control.
Like it gives them power, a way to punish the other person, dictate the terms.
Exactly. They're saying, you hurt me, now I get to decide how and when we move forward.
It's a form of protection almost, like holding on to that resentment as a shield.
But it's a dangerous game because it blocks genuine healing, prevents real intimacy from taking root.
So it's like a power struggle.
It can be. And that imbalance can be incredibly damaging, leading to more resentment, anger, and ultimately, it erodes that love and connection.
So how do you deal with that?
He says the first step is recognizing it. Being aware of how you might be using resentment to control your partner or the relationship.
Is being honest with yourself.
Exactly. Asking yourself the tough questions. Am I holding on to this hurt to punish them? Am I afraid to let go because I'm scared of being hurt again?
Yeah, those are tough questions to face.
They are, but they're necessary.
So once you see it, what do you do?
Well, he suggests shifting your focus from controlling your partner to controlling yourself. Taking responsibility for your own emotions, your actions, rather than trying to dictate how they should feel or behave.
It's about saying, I can't control you, but I can control me.
Exactly. Reclaiming your power, choosing to respond in a healthy, constructive way.
So that means setting boundaries, communicating your needs, practicing self-care.
Prioritizing your own well-being. You deserve to be treated with respect regardless of past mistakes.
Okay, so it's about self-respect, and then he also talks about forgiveness, right?
Both for yourself and for your partner. He calls it an act of liberation. It frees you from that grip of resentment.
It's letting go of that pain, making space for healing and growth.
It doesn't mean condoning or forgetting. It's about acknowledging the hurt, accepting the apology, and moving forward with a more compassionate and understanding heart.
And realizing that we're all human, capable of making mistakes, hurting each other, but also capable of learning, growing, and loving more deeply.
Absolutely. Embracing the imperfections, choosing to build a future based on love, forgiveness, understanding.
I love that. One thing that stood out to me was his emphasis on mental strength, how cultivating that inner strength is essential for navigating these challenges in relationships.
It's about developing resilience, that emotional intelligence to handle tough situations with grace.
So things like self-awareness, emotional regulation, empathy, setting boundaries.
Being able to stay grounded, centered, even when you're feeling triggered or overwhelmed.
He used a great analogy. He compared it to a tree. When it's deeply rooted, it can withstand the strongest storms.
Powerful imagery.
Yeah. He suggests we can build this inner strength through mindfulness, meditation, journaling, even therapy.
These practices help you connect with yourself, understand your emotions, and develop healthy coping mechanisms for stress and adversity.
They help you weather those storms.
Exactly.
So we've got a lot of tools here. What are some of the things that work for you personally?
Mindfulness is huge. It's just paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
So you're hitting pause on those racing thoughts and just observing your breath, your body, your surrounding.
Right. It calms the mind, reduces stress, and increases your self-awareness. Even 5 minutes in the morning can make a huge difference in how I handle things throughout the day.
Okay, I can see that.
Meditation's another powerful tool. Focusing your attention on a single point, like your breath, a mantra, or an image.
I've tried that, but honestly, I struggle to quiet my mind.
I hear you. It takes practice. But even starting with just a few minutes can be beneficial. And there are so many different types of meditation. Guided, walking, even dancing meditation. Find what works for you and stick with it.
I like that. Finding what works for you. What about journaling?
Journaling can be really helpful too. It gives you a way to process your emotions, get clear on your thoughts, track your progress over time.
It's like having a conversation with yourself, but on paper.
Exactly. A safe space to explore your inner world without judgment. It doesn't have to be this formal, structured thing. Just write down whatever comes to mind.
And if you're struggling with those deeper issues or finding it hard to cultivate that inner strength on your own, therapy can be a great resource.
Therapy provides that safe and supportive space to explore, to develop those healthy coping mechanisms, to work through past traumas or negative patterns.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. Nathan's insights on forgiveness, resentment, control dynamics, mental strength. This is so relevant for anyone wanting to build those healthy, fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. And one thing that really stuck with me was his belief that true forgiveness isn't about weakness, it's about strength.
It's having the courage to let go of the anger, the resentment,
The wisdom to learn from mistakes.
and the compassion to offer forgiveness to yourself and to your partner to give that fresh start.
Choosing love over fear, understanding over judgment, connection over isolation.
That's what it's all about. And it's not just a one-time thing, it's a journey.
It's a process, a commitment to growth.
Absolutely.
Welcome back. I'm really glad we're going to dig a little deeper into this.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the most fascinating things Naden explores is this connection between forgiveness and intimacy.
Yeah, that's something I don't think we talk about enough.
It makes sense, though.
Right.
If you're holding on to all that resentment.
How can you truly open up? Be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Resentment becomes this barrier, doesn't it? Blocks genuine connection.
Yeah.
It breeds distant suspicion. You're guarded, even when you want to be close.
It's like trying to build a campfire with wet wood. You get a few sparks, maybe, but
But no real warmth.
no lasting flame.
That's a perfect analogy. And Nathan gets really specific about this. He talks about the different layers of intimacy: physical, emotional, intellectual, even spiritual,
Yeah.
and how resentment can impact every single one.
Okay, break it down for me. How does resentment mess with those different types of intimacy?
Well, let's start with the physical.
Yeah.
You might see a lack of affection. Maybe you're hesitant to touch your partner or even feel repulsed by the idea. And it's not always a conscious thing either.
Right, you can be physically close, but miles apart emotionally.
Exactly. And then on the emotional level, resentment often leads to withdrawal, shutting down communication. Empathy goes out the window because you're so focused on your own hurt. You're walking on eggshells, afraid to say anything that might trigger them.
It's exhausting, right? And then there's the intellectual level. Resentment can actually stifle curiosity, creativity, that spark you used to have for sharing ideas, exploring new things together. It just fizzles out.
You're so stuck in the past that you can't even enjoy the present, let alone dream about the future together.
And then there's the spiritual level. Now, this doesn't have to be religious, but that sense of connection to yourself, your partner, to something bigger than both of you. Resentment can really block that off, leaving you feeling empty and isolated.
So if resentment is the poison, what's the antidote?
Naden's pretty clear. Forgiveness. It's what dissolves those barriers, allows intimacy to breathe again.
Okay, but easier said than done,
Yeah.
right? How do we actually cultivate forgiveness, rebuild that intimacy?
It starts with honesty, acknowledging the hurt, but expressing your feelings in a way that's constructive, not accusatory.
So those tough conversations are unavoidable, but how you have them really matters.
Respect, empathy, genuinely trying to understand the other person's perspective,
Even when it hurts.
even when it's hard. And owning your part, expressing remorse, not just saying sorry, but showing you understand how your actions impacted them.
So those sincere apologies, right, like Nathan talks about.
He's big on that. He says a real apology has three parts: acknowledging the hurt, expressing remorse, and making amends. No justifications, no shifting blame, just owning it.
And actually listening to your partner's pain. Really listening without getting defensive or interrupting.
Validation is huge here, showing them you understand the impact even if you don't agree on every detail.
Okay, so the apologies are out there, the hurt's acknowledged. What happens next?
Then the focus shifts to rebuilding trust. This is where actions speak louder than words. Being consistent, keeping promises, showing through your behavior that you're serious about making things right,
Proving to them you're reliable,
that you're trustworthy.
that you're willing to put in the work.
And patience is key here. Trust, especially after a major breach, takes time.
It's like tending a garden, right? You need the right conditions, consistent care, and time for things to grow.
What else can help that trust grow back? I think Naden also talks about the importance of creating positive experiences together.
Okay, so you're not just dwelling on the negative, you're actively nurturing the connection.
Making an effort to reconnect, have fun, remember why you fell in love in the first place?
Bringing back that spark.
Exactly. And making time for each other. I know life gets busy, but showing your partner they're a priority is essential.
So date nights, little gestures of appreciation, it all matters.
Those little things add up, and even just physical closeness, holding hands, cuddling.
Just being near each other.
Touch is powerful. It's a language of love and connection all on its own. And it doesn't have to be sexual. Sometimes just a hug, a shoulder squeeze can speak volumes.
And what about expressing gratitude, appreciation? I feel like that gets lost sometimes, especially when we're focused on all the negative stuff.
Naden's a big believer in that. Noticing the good things your partner does, big or small, and actually saying it out loud. Thank you, I love you, I appreciate you. Those words have so much power.
It's about showing them you value them. You're grateful they're in your life.
Exactly. And it shifts the energy, doesn't it? From focusing on what's wrong to appreciating what's right.
You know, as we're talking, I keep thinking about how intimacy is ultimately a choice. It's not something that just happens, it's something we have to actively cultivate.
That's such a good point. It's a decision to be present, to be vulnerable, to connect on a deeper level. And it's an ongoing choice, not a one-time fix.
It's like a muscle we need to exercise.
The more we use it.
The stronger it gets.
But we have to choose to put in the effort, to communicate, to forgive, to love unconditionally.
And that choice, that commitment, is what makes intimacy so powerful and rewarding.
It's an active creation, not a passive experience.
Okay, one thing we haven't talked about yet is how all of this forgiveness, resentment, intimacy affects children. They're like little sponges absorbing everything, even if we think we're hiding it well.
Absolutely. Kids are incredibly attuned to the emotional environment, to those unspoken dynamics. And when parents are stuck in those resentment patterns, it can create a lot of anxiety for children, insecurity, even fear.
It's like they're living in a house with a leaky roof. They might not see the leak, but they can feel the dampness, the chill.
I love that analogy. And Naden talks about how kids often internalize these conflicts. They blame themselves, feel responsible. Some even try to intervene to be the peacemaker between their parents.
That's so sad to think of a child carrying that burden, walking on eggshells all the time.
And sometimes they start mirroring those behaviors too, withdrawing, acting out, developing their own patterns of resentment,
So it becomes this cycle that gets passed down.
unless someone consciously breaks it.
Yeah.
And Naden's clear about where that starts. With the parents, taking responsibility for their own emotional well-being, modeling healthy communication and conflict resolution skills.
Showing their kids that it's okay to disagree, but how you handle it matters.
Respect, empathy, finding solutions together. Those are the lessons that stick.
And demonstrating forgiveness, both for themselves and for each other. Showing their kids that you can move forward after a conflict, repair relationships, choose love over anger. So powerful. So what can parents do? How do you even talk to kids about these things?
Naden encourages parents to create a safe space for kids to talk about their feelings, letting them know it's okay to feel sad, angry, confused. Whatever they're experiencing is valid.
And really listening without judgment, without minimizing their experience.
Exactly. Offering reassurance, comfort, support, even when it's tough to stay calm ourselves.
Because let's be real, sometimes we need help with that, right? Especially if the conflict's been going on for a while or if the kids are showing signs of distress.
Absolutely. Therapy can be so valuable for the couple to learn those communication skills and for the kids to process their emotions and develop healthy coping mechanisms.
Giving everyone the tools they need to navigate those choppy waters.
Huh.
So even though we think of forgiveness and resentment as adult problems, the impact on kids is undeniable.
It's one of the most important legacies we can leave them, isn't it? That foundation of healthy communication, conflict resolution, and, yes, forgiveness.
Building that emotional intelligence, that resilience.
It's a gift that will last a lifetime.
And speaking of gifts, one of the things Naden emphasizes is that forgiveness is ultimately a gift we give ourselves as much as we give it to others.
I love that. It's not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from that burden of carrying all that anger and resentment.
It's about recognizing that holding on to grudges only keeps you stuck.
It takes a lot of strength and courage to let go of those negative emotions.
It's not weakness, it's self-love.
Exactly. And it's interesting he talks about how our ability to forgive is often tied to our own sense of self-worth. If we don't believe we're worthy of forgiveness, it's hard to extend it to others.
That makes sense. If you're constantly beating yourself up, you're more likely to be harsh with others too. So how do you cultivate that self-forgiveness?
He suggests starting with self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend.
That's where mindfulness comes in, right? Noticing those negative thoughts without judgment, making space for self-acceptance.
Absolutely. And there are specific practices like loving kindness meditation that can help you cultivate that self-compassion and forgiveness.
He also mentions writing a letter to yourself, expressing remorse, acknowledging the hurt, offering yourself that forgiveness.
It's a powerful way to process those emotions, to let go of the guilt and shame.
And of course, if you're struggling, therapy can provide that safe space to work through those deeper issues.
It's about having someone guide you through that journey of self-discovery, helping you to uncover those limiting beliefs and cultivate a more loving relationship with yourself.
So self-forgiveness is not just a nice idea, it's essential for our well-being and for the health of our relationships.
Beautifully said. And what's amazing is that as we learn to forgive ourselves, it often becomes easier to forgive others,
It's like that ripple effect spreading outward.
creating a more compassionate world.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the emotional side of things, but Naden also digs into some fascinating psychological insights. He talks about how our early childhood experiences, especially our attachment patterns, can shape our capacity for forgiveness.
That's a huge piece of the puzzle. Those early attachment experiences really lay the foundation for how we view ourselves, others, and the world. They shape our beliefs about love, trust, how we handle conflict.
So someone with a secure attachment, where their needs were met consistently, they're more likely to approach relationships with a sense of trust and security. They're more likely to forgive, to see the good in others, and to believe that relationships can be repaired.
Exactly. But for those who had insecure attachment, whether it was anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, forgiveness can be much harder. They might struggle with trust, be afraid of abandonment, have difficulty regulating their emotions.
So understanding your own attachment style and your partner's can be so helpful. It's not about blaming your parents, but it's about having compassion for yourself, understanding those deeper patterns that might be driving your reactions.
It's about knowing where you're coming from.
Exactly, and recognizing that healing is possible.
Hmm.
Even if you didn't have that secure base in childhood, you can develop those secure patterns later in life.
Through therapy, conscious effort, supportive relationships,
You can rewire those old patterns.
create new ones that support healthy relationships.
Okay, so attachment's a big factor. And he doesn't stop there. He also talks about the impact of trauma on forgiveness.
Trauma, especially within a relationship, can be devastating. It can shatter your sense of safety, your trust, even your belief in your own worthiness. It makes forgiving incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like your whole world has been turned upside down.
And healing from trauma takes time. It takes specialized support and often professional help. It's not about rushing the process or minimizing the impact.
It's about creating that safe space for healing, both within yourself and within the relationship.
And recognizing that forgiveness might look different for someone who's experienced trauma. It might be a gradual process, involve setting boundaries, and require a different level of understanding and compassion.
So as we're exploring all these deeper layers, it becomes even more clear that forgiveness isn't a one-size-fits-all concept.
It's complex, nuanced, influenced by our individual experiences, our attachment styles, even our trauma histories.
And that's why it's so important to approach it with curiosity, with compassion, with a willingness to learn and grow.
To meet each other where we are, to acknowledge the complexity of the human experience, and to choose to move forward with love and understanding.
You know, one of the things I've been reflecting on is this idea of time. We always hear time heals all wounds. But I think Naden offers a more nuanced perspective.
He doesn't dismiss time, but he also says that time alone isn't enough. It's what you do with that time that matters.
So it's like time provides the space for healing, but you have to actively nurture it.
He suggests that we view time as an opportunity to process our emotions, to gain clarity, to make conscious choices about how we want to move forward.
It's about using that time wisely.
And he makes a good point that sometimes forgiveness happens quickly, and sometimes it takes years, even a lifetime. There's no right or wrong timeline.
It's about honoring your own pace, trusting the process,
Being patient with yourself, with your partner.
recognizing that we all heal differently.
Exactly.
You know, as we've been talking, I keep coming back to this connection between forgiveness and personal growth. Naden talks about how forgiveness isn't just letting go of the past, but actually using it to create positive change.
It's about turning those wounds into wisdom, that pain into purpose.
Like alchemy.
Exactly. And he points out that this growth often involves facing some hard truths about yourself, being honest about your part in things, your shortcomings.
It's not always easy.
It's not. But that willingness to change, to do the inner work, that's what lays the groundwork for true growth.
He sees forgiveness as a journey, not a destination.
It's messy, it's ongoing.
There will be setbacks.
You'll fall back into old patterns, the hurt will resurface. It's part of being human.
But he encourages us to keep going.
Keep practicing. Every step you take brings you closer to that place of peace, love, and understanding.
It's not always linear.
There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity and moments of doubt. Sometimes it'll feel easy, sometimes impossible.
But the journey itself is what transforms us.
It deepens your understanding of yourself, your relationships, and the human experience.
I love that. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Exactly. And one of the most beautiful things about forgiveness is that it lets you reclaim your power. When you hold on to resentment, you're giving your power away to the person or the situation that hurt you.
It's like they have control over you.
But when you choose to forgive, you take that power back, you break free from the past and create a future that aligns with your own values.
It's about agency, freedom.
Choosing how you want to feel, how you want to live.
You know, as we've been discussing all of this, I've been struck by how much of what Naden is saying resonates with ancient wisdom traditions.
It's true. These concepts of forgiveness, compassion, letting go, they're at the heart of so many spiritual and philosophical traditions throughout history.
Like in Buddhism, the idea of metta, or loving kindness, is all about cultivating inner peace and happiness. It's about extending compassion to everyone, even those who've hurt us.
And in Hinduism, the concept of karma emphasizes how interconnected we are and how important it is to take responsibility for our actions. Forgiveness is seen as a way to break free from that cycle of karmic retribution.
And of course, in Christianity, forgiveness is central point. Jesus taught that we should forgive as God forgives us.
And in many indigenous cultures, forgiveness is sacred. It's about restoring balance and harmony, often through rituals and a deep understanding of interconnectedness.
So even though Nathan's approach might seem modern and psychological, it's really tapping into these timeless truths.
The principles are universal. Forgiveness, compassion, letting go of resentment. These are essential for inner peace, healthy relationships, and a more compassionate world.
And what I appreciate about Nathan is that he makes these concepts accessible, practical.
He gives you tools anyone can use, regardless of their spiritual beliefs.
He shows us that forgiveness is not just for saints and sages. It's something we can all practice every day.
He empowers you to take ownership of your healing journey.
So we've talked about intimacy, the impact on children, the connection to ancient wisdom. It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm left with this sense of hope. Forgiveness is possible, even when it feels incredibly difficult.
It is. It takes courage. It takes strength. But it's worth it.
Because in the end, forgiveness is about freeing ourselves from the burden of the past.
Choosing to live with greater peace, love, and joy.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to wrap up our exploration of forgiveness and resentment. It feels like we've just scratched the surface.
I know, right? There's so much to unpack, so many layers to this. You know, as we're wrapping things up, I keep thinking about Nader's point about the two types of resentment. That distinction he makes between resentment that's coming from a genuine struggle to forgive and then resentment that's used as a tool, like for punishment or control.
That's really been sticking with me too. I've been turning it over in my mind. It really changes how you approach the situation depending on which one you're dealing with.
Absolutely. If someone's genuinely struggling to forgive, what they need most is support, empathy, understanding, help processing their emotions, working through the pain, figuring out how to let go. It's like offering a hand to help them climb out of a pit. You can't force them to take it, but you can be there, ready to support them.
It's about meeting them where they are, acknowledging that pain, validating their experience.
Not rushing them or minimizing their feelings.
Exactly. But when resentment is being used as a weapon to punish or control, that calls for a totally different approach. Then it's about setting boundaries, protecting yourself, refusing to play that blame game. It's realizing that you can't force someone to forgive you. And sometimes the healthiest choice is to just create some distance.
And that's where self-awareness and self-respect come in, right? You have to recognize your own worth and not let yourself be a victim.
He's saying that recognizing the difference between these two types of resentment is vital for making choices that protect you and the relationship.
Sometimes you have to face the hard truth that not all relationships can be saved.
So if you're caught in that cycle of resentment, whether you're struggling to forgive or you're on the receiving end, take a step back and ask yourself, what's really happening here? What are the motives?
It's about seeing the situation clearly, even when it's painful.
And remember, it's okay to ask for help. A therapist can offer support, help you understand those emotions, and learn better ways to communicate.
It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to reach out for help.
We could all use a little extra support sometimes.
Definitely. And it brings us back to one of Nathan's main points, that forgiveness is ultimately about healing ourselves. It's about taking back your power and choosing to live with more peace and joy.
It's a whole perspective shift, moving away from that victim role and recognizing that you have choices, that you can choose how to respond to hurt.
It's about realizing we're all imperfect, we all make mistakes, and holding on to grudges just keeps you stuck in that negativity.
It's about letting go and stepping into something better.
Choosing love over fear, understanding over judgment, connection over isolation.
I love that. What a powerful way to think about it. And, you know, as we wrap up our deep dive, I think Nathan's insights offer so much to reflect on, so much we can apply to our own lives.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself and to others. And that gift has the power to transform lives. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and choose love in all your relationships.